Okay, good morning, or should I say good afternoon. Salam alaikum, peace, love to everyone. Thank you for joining us on our show. 7-7, has it got better or worse? I'm honored to have such a distinguished lineup of speakers. Abdul Haqq Ashante will be joining us later, but we have an counter-extremism expert, an academic who's been working in the field for many years, who advises many organizations in the field of counter-extremism is here. But before I interview him, I just would like to give a few seconds silence to remember all the people who passed away at the 7-7 attack. May God bless their soul. We pray for peace, love to all their families and send our condolences to all victims. And we pray for peace and reconciliation with all communities. Okay, without further ado, I'm here with Dr. Lewis Herrington, an academic who works and studies a lot of subjects around counter-extremism. He informed me about his very interesting book. His book is amazing, and it's giving another insight into counter-extremism. Because suddenly, when you're speaking to so-called, I put that word in, so-called experts around counter-extremism, and I've mentioned your book and what you've been saying, they don't understand it because they put everything in a box. So, Mr. Lewis Harrington, tell us about you and the work that you do around counter-extremism, and how did you get involved in counter-extremism?
Thank you, Ismael. I'm very grateful to be able to speak. Thank you for giving me a platform. I'm very grateful, especially as I'm now coming to the end of my book, the end of writing up what has really been, I suppose, a couple of years worth of research, Europe-wide. And I've really been in this field for 10 years now. So I got into it at the master's, in my master's degree, when I spent time in Palestine, and back here through my PhD. And it was really inspired by 7-7, you know, because I grew up in Dewsbury. You know, I grew up where the guys who carried out the London bombings grew up. I went to the same schools. You know, I went to the same community centers. You know, they were from my community. You know, working class lads from Leeds. You know, so that was always the puzzle that fascinated me, and it's taken me 10 years really to understand why men in Europe would give their lives for what we call a martyrdom operation. And for the last 3 years, you know, we're talking today about the UK context and 2005.
Yes. Well,
the difficulty back then in studying extremism and martyrdom is the amount of data, paucity of data. We didn't have enough data. So what we tended to do was clump together a guy who's blowing himself up on the London Underground with a young lad who's read Inspire magazine. And we say, well, what motivates him? Well, it must surely be what motivates him. So what we've done is, to get around the limit of data, we've just put everybody in the same pot.
Yes.
And it's led to some phenomenally wild programs like, you know, Prevent. Let's prevent 10-year-olds in school, you know. And because of that lack of data, there's been a whole load of frameworks and theories and all of this stuff. In the last 3 years, we've had more data. And for the last few years, I've been engaged in a European-wide project, which was to take every man who has actually carried out a martyrdom attack, put them into one data set, and study their lives. Now, there's only 80 men. And because there's only 80 men.
So just to confirm, is that 80 men from Europe?
Yes.
Or 80 men from the UK?
So
Okay.
between, I think I've got the share, if this host is disabled, if I can share screen, I can give you a snapshot of what that data set looks like.
Please.
I think the admin will have to allow me to share screen. Hopefully he's listening in. For the last 20 years, there's only been 80 men. I've got this now. I can share this. Here we go. Right. Can you see what I see?
Yes.
This is all of the men. We've got London Bridge, Madrid, Paris, Shoe Bomber, Stockholm, Tours, Westminster, Wurzburg, Champs-Élysées, Anspach. These are all the men that have attempted and for the majority succeeded. And they come, this is the target country, the heritage. And then what we did was for every possible variable we could think of, 1 or 0, we started gathering all of the data. And we've included criminal record, drug use, prison record, childhood dysfunctionality, absent father, absent mother, 2 parents, stable parents, raised in the EU. Were they unobservant before they embraced extremism? How old were they when they became extremists? You know, were they alone? Were they with friends? Was there any history of psychopathology?
Ooh.
There was a high level of neurosis, not necessarily psychosis, but
Yes.
you know, narcissism, personality disorders. So we gathered all of this data and we put all this together. And this is good because this is for the first time data-driven theorizing, not, you know, oh, I know that I saw, you know, 2 people, you know, very anecdotal, very small group. No, we've looked at the whole of Europe and there's only 3 variables that stand out. I've drawn you see a picture. We've got a set of martyrs.
Yes.
Set of extremists.
Okay.
And then a control group. Okay. So 3 variables stand out across the 3 sets. In the control group, which is young Muslim lads 18 to 30, no involvement in extremism. Substance abuse amongst this data set is 5%. So anywhere in Europe, drug use by 18 to 30-year-old young Muslims, 5%.
Okay.
If you look at the set of lads who are involved in extremism, it's about 10%. If you look at the set of men in our study who did carry out martyrdom, it's 74%.
Oh my gosh. So 74% of the 80 people who committed terror attacks were former drug addicts. My gosh.
They were unobservant drug addicts who turned to a fellowship of like-minded extremists. Now that's one variable. The second variable is, of the men who do finally carry out a martyrdom attack, before they turn to extremism, they were unobservant. They were doing drugs, they were partying, they were sex before marriage, they were having a good time.
Yeah.
And the other variable that stands
Rolling Stones.
They're the Rolling Stones, you know, the Beatles.
Yeah.
You know, they were having a great time. And the other variable, so 3 variables stand out in the data set. History of substance abuse, unobservant, and having trouble in personal relationships. These 3 variables, and this is the important keyword, before. We're not talking about the guys when they were involved in extremism. We're talking about what was their lives like before they got involved. And why is that important? Because we want to, if this webinar is about how are we preventing people, how are we trying to encourage people to not go down that road? Well, then we need community-based solutions that effectively, you know, the solution is better understanding of Islam. The fact that if we look at the control group, the ones who did have a history of substance abuse, did get involved in extremism, didn't carry out martyrdom. They were the ones who had a solid grounding in Islam. They knew that that martyrdom wasn't a solution. They knew it wasn't going to give them the personal redemption, because that's what this is all about, really. It's rational. It's psycho-rational. I've got a history of dysfunctional behavior. I've made so much a mess of my life. My parents are full of shame. I'm full of shame. My family's full of shame. I can't continue. And I realized, you know what? There is a solution. I've come to believe that if I carry out a martyrdom operation, I'll be forgiven.
Yes.
All of
redemption.
The things I've done. It's all about rational choice, redemption. It's when I reach a point of hopelessness where, you know, I cannot continue the lifestyle that I'm living. You know, I can't go back to that substance abuse, but I can't seem to live with it. I can't live without it. I need something. And I've got so much shame. The secret for most of this is shame. It's shame. Shame is at the heart of this. You know, I'm so ashamed about how I've behaved. You know, take Salman Abidi in Manchester. Yes. You know, I mean, it caused so much trouble for his family. You know, he was so ashamed of a lot of that. I think he saw this as an act of redemption. You know, it's a chance to redeem myself, to show everyone, look, I'm not that worthless little loser that you think I am. And he fitted three things. One, he had a history of substance abuse. Two, he was highly unobservant until he became a wannabe jihadi. And three, he was having serious trouble in personal relationships. And we've identified those three variables as key indicators, you know. So in terms of what is the solution? I think one of the best organizations that's doing real work on the ground at the moment, Kick It in Birmingham. At Kick It, you know, people, when they want to get free of that lifestyle, they need solutions.
Okay.
And if you ask yourself, in the Muslim community, if you've got a great deal of shame and substance abuse, what are the solutions available to you? You know, is there enough people saying, look, you don't have to be ashamed. You can make things right. You can make up for all the things you've done wrong by doing good deeds now.
Yes. So this is the alternative methodology in dealing with young people who came from, i.e. gangs, i.e. certain addictions, whether it's drugs, whether it's pornography, whether it's alcohol. So we need to emphasize the shame. So you're saying shame is the main root of the problem?
I'm saying shame is the root cause of martyrdom. I'm saying for Europe, I'm saying, and I want to be specific because people are going to say he's trying to generalize for the whole world. And I'm saying that for the 80 men in my data set, the ones whose lives I've gone over with a magnifying glass, the ones who we've been able to do trend analysis, for the ones that we have got their life stories laid out in front of us, for these men, shame is a big part of it. They are carrying out martyrdom. They're killing others to kill themselves, because the whole process is what gives them, I've got it here, but the benefits strongly outweigh the costs. If you work for God, and let's be clear as well, an important distinction that people they keep failing to make this distinction. Spirituality and religion are not synonymous. If I am a martyr, I am not dying for Islam, and I am not dying for Muhammad. I'm not dying for what it says in the Quran. If I'm carrying out martyrdom, I'm doing it for God. And if I work for God, it's absolutely rational, because I'm not interested in earthly rewards. I'm focused on clearing up the wreckage of my past. And that's got so much shame to do with it. I've got so much shame about how I've behaved. I've got shame because of how I've behaved in my community. I'm ashamed because of what my family think about me. I'm ashamed because in most cases, my relationships haven't worked out.
Yes.
It's the shame that creates the feeling of hopelessness. I cannot see a time when my life's going to be any better. So it fits.
And just asking, sorry to interrupt. As a man who's from academia, and I'm trying to say this as respectfully as possible.
Oh, it's good.
And I'm not saying this because you're here. With the exception of you, most people I've met in academia, they talk a lot of rubbish. No disrespect, okay?
Oh, it's true, I agree.
I know my admin might not like me saying that, but I'm going to keep it real. Sorry, that's just me. When, in your opinion, as a man of academia, and your research I respect highly, it's one of the best I've ever seen, okay? How do you rate other academic work on extremist radicalization that you see in the forefront, that so-called government, legislators, policymakers are using as proof and evidence to carry out certain issues?
The third chapter, the chapter that I just finished, the chapter I'm working on now is about epistemologies and methodologies. And God bless them, the government can only work with what's been put out there.
Yeah.
The leading experts, Peter Newman, Mark Sageman, they are working on the data that's available. If I look at my data set for all 80 men, I would say that 60 of them, the checking is, they come after 2014.
Okay.
So if you look at a lot of the models that are out there, the NYPD's model, that's about 10 years old. We've got models for why people become extremist, right? And there's hundreds of people who become extremist. Yeah. Being an extremist does not mean I'm going to carry out a terrorist attack. We've confused what it means to be an extremist with what it means to be a martyr. There's a very big difference between me saying, yeah, I'm an extremist, I'll go fight in Syria. Why not? And there's a difference between that and me saying, do you know what? I think I'm just going to go and do a terrorist attack in London. I don't care. I'm not bothered about going to Syria. They are two fundamentally different sets of individuals. And we've too long conflated them together. But I understand why, because we haven't had any data. And politicians want answers. They want answers even though we didn't have the data. This book is the first study that's based upon having actual data. And we've had to go across Europe to get it. It's needed. I've needed to look at the whole of Europe. And that whole of Europe, there's only been 49 successful attacks. And from 49 successful attacks, I've got a set of 80 men. And to build that data set took a long time. But until we built it, you can't see any trends. There's things that are anecdotal. In 2004, we knew that the three of the main people responsible for the Madrid attacks, we knew they were recovering heroin addicts, right? We knew that. But on its own, it was only a little fragment. We knew that the guys responsible for the Paris 2015, We know that they were struggling, recovering addicts from skunk cannabis. We know that Khalid Massoud was a recovering crack addict. We had lots of anecdotal, and people say, yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but you know, they stopped doing those drugs when they started becoming extremist. Right, true. But that tells us nothing about what recovery from addiction actually entails. And actually, it's once you've gone into that, you know, this idea that you can suddenly just get well by, you know, without any kind of psychological intervention. You know, the people that I interviewed for the book in Narcotics Anonymous, this is a lifelong struggle. This is a lot of psychotherapy. You don't just suddenly stop, you know, a drug problem or an alcohol problem. It doesn't just magic away. It has long-reaching implications. And actually, most people said that when the drink and drugs stop, that's when the psychological problems begin.
So just to ask, as someone who's done the research, on average, how long does it take for someone to fully recover from being a recovering drug addict?
Yeah. Time is not so much the factor. It's like saying, how long does it take somebody to grow up? Well, if there's a difference between physically growing up and mentally growing up, emotionally growing up. You know, I know people who are in their 30s who still act like teenagers. It's the same thing with recovery. If you're not engaged in an approved program, say CBT, psychotherapy, if you're not involved in 12-step programs, if you are not engaged in a structured psychological intervention, the only thing that you are is that you have stopped smoking cannabis. And that means that you've done nothing to undo the guilt or the shame. So all of that guilt and shame that's been accumulating in the life of Salman al-Bidi, years of guilt and shame, he's still got it. He's still got it in the 6 months prior to the Manchester Arena attack, because he hasn't done anything. And if you've got a guy who's no longer got access to drugs, who's no longer using drugs, which for many people is the solution, not the problem. He's dry, he's not using drugs. He's still got all of the guilt and the shame that compounded now. And then somebody comes along to him in Libya and says, how would you like to get free? How would you like to get free of all the guilt, all of the shame that you've caused your family, all of that stuff that you've done? I can give you an instant solution. That's how Martyrdom, I went through a lot of the old magazines from the 90s. They were called Al Jihad. And all of these magazines, they were edited by Abu Hamza al-Masri, the guy with the hooks. He's now in Supermax, Colorado.
He's the teacher at my uncle's house.
Wow, there you go.
That's how I got involved in this work, yeah.
That's how you're involved. Well, you might have seen copies of Al Jihad. Yeah. And Abu Hamza, he used to constantly bang on. He would say, look, you know, if you are struggling with guilt, martyrdom is the solution. Same message that was coming from Omar Bakri Mohammed. If you cannot stop using drugs, martyrdom is the solution. I mean, this
is from the 1990s.
I've got the magazines, the 1990s. You know, it's dedicated. Martyrdom is the solution for anybody who is struggling with guilt, shame, and remorse. If you're feeling bad about you and you can't make things right, martyrdom. And it makes sense because we're talking about forgiveness of sin the moment blood is shed. The moment. And it's not just that. You know, if you look at the narrative, if you carry out martyrdom, if you put your hand up, it doesn't matter if you succeed or not. You just have to try. I take action, God takes care of the results. You take Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. He's unrepentant. He said, it doesn't matter if I have to sit in this prison for 40 years. I've already got what I wanted. What I wanted was martyrdom, and I've got it, even though I haven't died yet. I take action, God takes care of the results. So for a lot of these guys, take Michael Adebellagio. He's running at the policeman with an unloaded gun. What's the first thing he says when he wakes up in hospital? He's furious. He says, now I've got to wait for the rewards, right? I've got to sit in prison for 40 years, you know, because he didn't get what he wanted, which is that instant, you know, he's already made the decision. He's already given his life. Yeah. He's already believed that he's going to get all of the rewards, you know, and he had a lot of guilt and shame. He had like 6 children by 6 different women. He had so much shame. In court, he said he'd been clean for 2 years. And I think maybe he was. And I think what's happened is he's been clean for 2 years, but the guilt and the shame is ripping him apart. Yeah. And he can't cope with it. And it's like, how do I get free? Well, for 10 years, as a poster boy for ALM, for 10 years, he's been told, jihad or martyrdom, die on the battlefield, you're forgiven. You know? Yes,
because he was regularly sent to to Afro-Caribbean Muslims around South London, Greenwich, Lambeth, Brixton, Harlesden, Northwest London, and Wembley to recruit Afro-Caribbean boys to ALM. Yeah. Also, there's reports, according to my sources, that he tried to join Al-Shabaab.
Yeah.
6 years, and he complained that he was actually abused in a Kenyan prison because of when he got caught. So this goes with your shame, with what you're saying. So with regards to the shame element, do you think that is related to the trauma and mental health? Where do you stand with trauma and mental health having...
Absolutely. So one of the 100 complex trauma, the term is quite new, it's a couple of years old. Individuals who've grown up in a house where they've never really felt that their emotional needs have been met, because often they grew up in a house with lots of other brothers and sisters. And it's not that their parents don't love them, it's that there's not as much love to go around. And so what you find is, Tim Fletcher talks about complex trauma. He says that if you've grown up with complex trauma, you are going to struggle in personal relationships. All of this study, most of the men in this study, 80%, had never had a girlfriend. Or they'd never had any serious kind of relationship. Okay. Because they didn't have you know, relationships are for grown-ups. They're not for emotionally stunted children. You know, and that's what many of these guys were. They struggled in personal relationships. They were disconnected from their family. Take a good example, 21/7, the failed London bombers. When we talk about 7/7, what about 21/7?
Oh, 2 or 3 weeks afterwards. I remember that one. Yeah,
two weeks afterwards, the leader, Mukhtar Saeed Ibrahim, okay? I mean, he is a classic case of struggled with personal relationships, could not stop smoking weed, ended up trying to rob his friends and family to get money to pay for his weed addiction. Then he finds himself in Feltham, young offenders, right? And suddenly he's given, you know, he has this sort of spiritual awakening, right? And he has I can't remember exactly, but he finds that instead of being addicted to drugs, you can get addicted to jihad, right?
Yes.
It's just as exciting, right? Yeah. And he becomes obsessed. He just swaps one drug for another. And he's like, this is great. I'm going to go off and fight jihad in wherever. But he can't quite do it because he's dysfunctional. This is a guy that can't, you know, barely tie his shoelaces. So he really struggles to actually fulfill what he wants to do. So he's got cripplingly low self-esteem, but he's got this sky-high ego. And he's very much, you know, recruits other people who are very, you look at the characters around 21, you know, these are individuals who, bless them, they've struggled in childhood. They've struggled in personal relationships. They've struggled with their emotional nature. This identity, this martyr identity, it's the first time that they've started to feel they belong to something. And when we talk about solutions, you know, if you want to empower people, if people are struggling with substance abuse, there's better solutions. And one of the things that we did find in the studies across Europe, and this is important, 12-step fellowships do not feature very prevalently. I mean, they're huge in terms of recovery from substance abuse, and they're tiny when it comes to and I think that the reason is shame. If my son's going to Alcoholics Anonymous, he's going to bring shame on the family. He's going to bring shame on the community. Can't tell the local doctor because he knows the family. So I'm not even going to get a referral to AA. I'm not going to get a referral to NA. My God, our son is a drug addict. Can you imagine the shame in the community?
Yeah.
Outcast. Again, what's the driving motivation? Shame. We got to start talking about the reality, which is more, and this is since 2000, more young Muslim lads are doing drugs.
Yes.
What was that? Drugs, you know, we cannot pretend that it's not happening. And instead of compounding their shame, because it's the shame that's driving them to it, instead of compounding that shame, it's time to say, you know what we need in this community? We need Narcotics Anonymous. We need Alcoholics Anonymous. We need to stop pretending that we don't need these wild solutions, because we do. Because you know what? An alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous?
What?
Al-Mujroon. You know what is an alternative to Narcotics Anonymous? Al-Mujroon, right? Fellowship, structure, friends, right? Everything that you should be getting if you've got a drug problem, which most of the men in my data set did have a problem. If you've got a drug problem and you need the solution and you're not allowed to go to Narcotics Anonymous, or you don't want to go to NA because you're afraid of shame, you know, ALM offers you the alternative. Friends, fellowship, prayer 5 times a day. It's very similar to Narcotics Anonymous, right? You know, that's the thing. And again, and I want to be clear, I am not talking for extremism generally. I am I'm interested specifically in the men in my study, and I can only speak for that. I could be wrong about the larger extremist community, but I'm saying the ones who go on and actually go and do the deal, they're the ones that we need to be concerned with, and that's the important thing. And when you look at I'll end on this, extremism generally. Let's take the guy in New Zealand that shot up the mosque. Let's take Darren Osborne, who drove a van into a group of Muslims outside Finsbury Park Mosque. Yeah. Both of those two, history of substance abuse.
Look at
Darren Osborne was a member of AA.
Look at that. Look at that. I'm going to ask you, as Abdul Haqq is just coming in, okay, which is, we're proud and honored that he's blessed us with his presence. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Thank you. Before we come back to you, Abdul Haqq, what would be your advice to policymakers, and on a policymakers level, and to community leaders on how to challenge this issue head on?
See, I would say deal with the shame first. It is the shame that allow young people to know that there is no shame in the behavior that they may have begun. That the shame of being in a gang, the shame of substance abuse, the shame of premarital sex. If you don't allow people to talk about these and get support for these things, they're going to internalize that shame, and they're going to look for solutions outside of the community. They're going to be pushed to the periphery for fear of being able to talk about it. And it is the shame that flows throughout the radicalization process. In respect of the men in my study, I can't speak for a whole of the community.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you.
Lewis Herrington. But please stay. We need you here because we're still going to come back to you, yeah? So make yourself comfortable.
That's all right.
Yeah, have a cuppa. Make yourself at home. Make yourself at home, mate. Make yourself at home. Okay, I'm honored to have our next guest. He's an author, an academic, a lecturer, a community worker, a community advisor to many community grassroots organizations and practitioners around the UK. His name is Mr. Abdul Haqq Ashante. Assalamu alaikum, my brother.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alhamdulillah, thank you. You're here, and we're honored that you're here. May Allah bless you. As a person who does some work, who's been working in counter-extremism for over 18 years, is it fair to say?
Yeah, about that, yeah.
18 years, yeah. You've authored numerous books that I believe that people who are interested and want to know more about counter-extremism, I believe they should know about your books, especially about certain hate preachers where you've gone into certain depths. Can you please tell us about some of the work that you've done around your authorship and publishing, please?
Bismillah and alhamdulillah. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Amma ba'd. So, all praise due to Allah. Thank you very much as well, Ismael, for this, for organizing and hosting this event, where we can maybe discuss some issues which have sort of transpired, we could say, post. I think the topic is post 7/7, but actually a lot of the issues surfaced actually pre 7/7 actually. So I mean, some of the work which we've been involved in the communities, we could say there was a lot of these harmful narratives were already, as you were probably fully aware, they were actually around in the 1990s, and I actually came across it myself in my own time. Some of these ideas and some of this narrative, some of the key themes of this narrative were quite popular, as you're aware, and you've kind of alluded to some of that in terms of some of the individuals, some of the ideologues who were active in London during the 1990s. Due to which some of these themes were around. So themes such as, for example, that one which was popular was that the UK and other sort of non-Muslim countries are actually abodes of war, Dar al-Harb, in which, and as a result of which, all kinds of criminality can be participated in, and all of that is all fully justified as long as it's going back to contributing to the so-called jihad. So that was something which is common, and that led to people who we're aware of, people participating in robbing, stealing, armed robberies, burglaries. Basically, essentially, it was just a justification, or the narrative provided a justification for someone to continue with criminality, essentially. But this was actually being justified now with some kind of recourse, or an apparent recourse to justified justified actions via contorting Islamic texts. You see what I'm saying? So this was something which was very common. Sometimes people were making reference to some stories which they thought would give them sanction for their actions, or they were misconstruing some verses from the Quran and some statements, hadith from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these things were common. So that's just one aspect. The whole notion is al-hab. Then there's also the notion of but there's an emphasis on Muslim countries and the governmental structure of Muslim countries. That in fact there was a narrative of, actually those countries are not actually Muslim countries, and as a result of that, this also would justify, participation in other kind of nefarious activities, either to topple those governments or to cause some kind of destabilization, wherein those kind of systems were removed. Why? Because the narrative, as the narrative says, those countries, they don't rule by what Allah has revealed. It's hukum bighayri ma anzal Allah. It is rule other than God's sovereignty, and as a result of that, those regimes and those systems and those governments need to be toppled. This was again something which was very common, as I'm sure you're aware, being from West London. I'm sure you're aware that was something which was a very common narrative. So these are the things which we had to deal with in the 1990s. So before there was any kind of concern, when these ideologues were granted safe haven and refuge in the United Kingdom and living very handsomely from Her Majesty's benevolent welfare state, these were the kind of things which we had to deal with. You see what I'm saying? These narratives, we have to sort of challenge these narratives head on, robustly. I would say, I think as you're aware, that there was probably more, there are certain communities I would say were more astute and more aware of those narratives. You see what I'm saying? Especially communities in sort of Brixton, Birmingham, and Luton, who sort of who are more sort of who adhere to the Salafi methodology. They were very credit where credit is due. I think anyone would be rather unjust if they didn't give credit where credit's due and say that these particular the Salafi methodology has been at the forefront in terms of directly challenging those kind of ideas before it became a fashion trend to do so post 9/11. Wherein post 9/11 became a sort of a fashion trend for everyone to then always come out and say, "Yo, yes, I condemn extremism and I condemn this and that and I condemn this and that." And an interesting story with regards to that, Ismael, I think I've told you before, is that where we is that when I at the time when Brixton Mosque. So this is in 2002, when the whole story of Abdul Rahim, Richard Reed, the so-called shoe bomber, came to light. When one of my colleagues at the time, Abdul Baker, who was the head of the mosque at the time, when he was speaking in the media at the time about how prevalent that kind of ideology is becoming in the urban locale, this was something which was seen as kind of, this was something which was seen as being as akin to being heresy for someone to kind of talk and condemn it openly. You see what I'm saying? So this is true. So this was something which when Abdul Baker, he had the nerve to sort of say, no, this is a narrative which we've had to deal with. We're not getting any kind of sort of support for this. We haven't got the resources to deal with all cases, non-individuals, but this is something which you have to deal with. And one of the things which Abdul Baker mentioned at the time was about how pervasive this narrative is, and where violence is being justified and granted sanction. But when Abdul Baker mentioned at the time in 2002 and was in the media, we received a phone call, and I heard the message myself left on the phone, and it was from a well-known Muslim organization who had the audacity to say, just keep your views to your own mosque. Don't need to sort of, broaden the issue to other mosques. Just keep the view to your own. Just keep what you're saying to your own mosque. But complete false though, because it wasn't something which was restricted to a mosque. It's something which is actually in the community in any way. But that's just a good indication of how there was this kind of total denial of any kind of problem. You see what I'm saying? Total denial, just total sort of people sort of felt more comfortable sticking their heads in the sand like an ostrich, rather than to sort of challenge this. But the issues as to why it can be challenged, maybe, and this is where it gets interesting, which is where maybe I think many communities are not familiar with the narrative, the intricacies of it, which is what I've been sort of, which is what I've been working on over the last few years, 15 years or so.
And tell us about your books, please. The books that you have pertaining to this issue that some of our audience
so we've authored books. 2009, we authored a book. Not just myself, as I co-authored that with a very good friend of mine, Abdul Rahman Abu Amina, who's from Luton, and he's also very experienced. He's from Luton, and we wrote a book 2009 called Critical Studies of the Multiple Identities of Al-Muhajirun, where we sort of took apart their sort of narrative and some of their ideas in detail in a published book. We also authored the two of us again, we authored in 2011. In 2010, we both also wrote a book on Abdullah al-Jamaiqi, or who's also known as Abdullah al-Faisal al-Jamaiqi. So we wrote a book on him as well, and his erroneous and specious ideas. We also took those apart. And then 2011 as well, we deconstructed some of the ideas of Anwar al-Awlaki, who was becoming very popular. Anwar al-Awlaki started off very moderate and was a moderate preacher. And in fact, he was so moderate, I think in the late 1990s, actually, it was Abdul actually. Abdul actually did a lecture called CIA Islam. And this CIA Islam, who was Abdullah Faisal talking about? He's talking about Anwar al-Awlaki. So according to him at the time, he actually assumed Anwar al-Awlaki to be like a CIA spy and agent, based upon an extract which he heard from a sermon. So what it seems with Anwar al-Awlaki, unfortunately, is that he became more kind of entrenched into that narrative until it led him to become sort of full-blown. From whence he was moderate, he then became sort of full-blown sort of jihadi popularizer, you know. And he started to regurgitate some of the ideas with like we can pull evidence. This is where we were interested in. Some of the evidence that he was using to justify these things. You see what I'm saying? He was trying to justify targeting of civilians, which was really concerning. And he made reference, in that case, he made references to certain stories, which are not even hadith. They're just like sort of stories, narrations. They're not hadith from any of the found in the books of hadith. But he was like making reference to sort of stories which are not authentic. He was also starting to refer to some of the people who were linked to Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. He was starting to use he started to justify he did an explanation of a classical book of jihad fiqh, jihad jurisprudence, and in his explanation he tried to even justify or grant sanction to those people who indulge in, see what I'm saying, robberies and bank robberies and armed robberies and so forth.
Yeah.
And all he could say about that is that should be coordinated and there should be a leader to distribute that. And he tried to give like a ruling on what category of such finance should be regarded within Islamic fiqh. You know what I'm saying? And it's totally erroneous what he's saying. So I'm saying totally disregarding any kind of notions of ethics, of ethics in terms of the jihad ethics. And disregarding all the ethics to do with, you see what I'm saying, jurisprudence. So there's some major gaps, you see what I'm saying? But unfortunately, because people had an emotional attachment to him, you see what I'm saying, like blindly followed him.
Yes.
It's because of what he was saying. And that's not really like how it should be, you see what I'm saying?
Just to interrupt there, I was trying to explain to someone, because they might have done videos or cassettes or DVDs about a certain aspect of faith. They developed a fan base where they wouldn't take those things seriously, or they'll just accept them. But for the critics that say, hold on, El Faisal, Anwar Laki, and Mahajaroon, they're from over 10, 15 years ago. They ain't no threat now. What would you say to someone who says that? Abdul Haqq Ashante.
No, I mean, first of all, their audios and stuff that still abound. That's the first thing. The main thing. Their audios and their cassettes and their ideas are still abound. They're still very popular. You know what I'm saying? That's the first thing. The second thing is that even though, disregarding their lecture and their tapes, the narrative is essentially the same. Narrative is essentially the same, you see what I'm saying? There might be some slight little differences between them and other fanatical groups, you see what I'm saying? But the core ideas of the ideologies, they're still the same. They regurgitate themselves every so often, you see what I'm saying? And we know that the first ones to come with these ideas were the Khawarij during the time of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad. Peace be upon him, you see what I'm saying? They were the first ones to come with it. But why it's concerning is how people, they attach themselves to people who have scant knowledge, and this is where it's a calamity. You see what I'm saying? I mean, the Quran says, "Fasalu ahla dhikri in kuntum la ta'lamun." Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. And unfortunately, those people that became regarded as being sort of qualified people with requisite knowledge in Islam, when they didn't have the requisite knowledge to kind of speak and issue such pronouncements. This is where it's really worrying from our perspective. You see what I'm saying? And then as well that they were speaking without knowledge. So, and we know that this is about the people who speak without knowledge. Prophet he also mentioned that in Hadith, that there are way better.
And as someone who advises mosques in communities, especially urban communities, on counter-extremism and radicalization, what would be your advice in general to mosques in a post-COVID world, as it were, in challenging extremism, radicalization?
I mean, I don't really think I'm really qualified to impart any sort of advice to
You're being
people.
too humble.
But from what I see has worked in the past is mainly being keeping on your toes with regards to what the core narrative and the ideas are. You see what I'm saying? This is the main thing which I'm concerned about. Most of the serious research in any case does emphasize that a lot of extremism doesn't actually take place within mosques. They occur away from mosques. You see what I'm saying? They occur, they occur in the shadows. They occur off the radar. You see what I'm saying? They're hidden. These transcripts. These are hidden transcripts which are off the radar. They're not things which are going to be openly expounded upon within the mosques. So most serious research, academic research as well, has noted that much radicalization doesn't really take place in mosques. The only instance where you could say it has taken place in a mosque, there are a few anomalies, like with Finsbury Park when Abu Hamza was running it. But other than that, radicalization and extremism doesn't really occur within a mosque setting. There has been, and that's kind of a hallmark as well, that that there's poor academic research, as if they start saying that mosques play a role in that, when it's not really the case. So I think so as a result of that, it's important for mosques to kind of also maybe have an outreach element. You see what I'm saying? Where they're aware of what's going on in their area, their surroundings, and in what the narrative is in the arena. If they're unaware of that, if they're not privy to what those narratives are, they're already going to be off to a bad start, as far as I'm concerned, as far as it appears. They need to be aware.
And and what do you think of the role of social media, the internet, has played or is currently playing in the field of radicalization and extremism today? And do you think there should be some accountability to Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and so forth?
Yeah, definitely there should be. I think to be honest, I think they do already have, or they assert to have something in place. I think they do have something. I know that Google have done a lot of, from what I understand, I've got some colleagues who have done work with Google. I think it was very, very scant. I don't think it was really detailed whatsoever. But there has been some stuff which I know that on paper they do assert to address these matters, but it's very scant as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can see.
Okay, Dr. Lewis Herrington, what do you think about with your research, what role or how do you think social media and the internet has played? What role do you think they've played in radicalization and extremism in the past 5 to 10 years and presently in the future?
Okay, so again, just want to reiterate that the headline, that in our study we had 3 groups. We had martyrs, we had non-martyr extremists, and then we had a control group of non-martyrs, non-extremists. We had 80 people in each of these data sets. It's the first controlled study of martyrdom for the whole of Europe, EU funded. One of the variables that we had on there, I'll just bring it up. If I can share screen, just a second, share screen. Let's have a look. Right, so this is the martyr data set. So these are all the men who carried out martyrdom. And if we look at radicalized alone, which was primarily made use of the internet. Let's bring that down. 21%. You can see there. So,
Ooh.
and it was, I think I'd have to bring up the other, for the non-martyrs, the ones who will never go and do the deal, the ones that are armchair generals and just want to spread stuff, you know, who are disseminating loads of stuff. These individuals, I think it was because they never became martyrs, but they were involved in extremism, was about 50%. So for individuals who are involved in extremism, I'll just press that back. No, for individuals who are involved, it's a big thing, but you know, in that respect, you're asking, where do you draw the line on freedom of speech? You know,
yes.
What do you, in a world that doesn't even have a proper definition for extremism, you know, you ask 10 different experts, what does extremism mean to you? You'll get 10 different answers. And they'll all say, so I try not to spend too much of my time looking at extremism. And I focus very much on social psychology, just in respect of the men who are blowing up Manchester Arena, the men that are running around London with knives, the guy that was in Reading, who was in the park stabbing people, the guys in Paris, the guys in Brussels. And I look specifically at those individuals, because that's really, for me, where my attention needs to be. You know, there's hundreds, there's tens of thousands of extremists, right? What they're doing on the internet, they're doing on the internet. But the men who I need to be concerned about, the men that I need the security services to have under surveillance, those are the ones I'm interested in. And really, the data, and I am always trying to speak with data, because there's so much speculation and anecdotal, and I read this on YouTube and I saw this. No. What does the data say? What can you quantify with data? 20%. And I think the main case was probably the two guys who killed the priest. They'd been connected through, I think, Telegram. But the truth was, these two lads were already up for an attack anyway. If they hadn't have been, you know, if they hadn't have come together and carried out the attack there, they would have done something like the guy in Reading anyway. When we talk about situational factors are only relevant in terms of whether there's going to be a group of individuals carrying out an attack, or whether it's going to be a lone actor. You know, if I look back at the data set, you know, actually, mostly for the last 20 years, of the men that have carried out the deal, who've done the deal, who've crossed the line, no question, the majority of these men are lone actors. Okay, the ones that are involved in cells tends to be situational. It tends to be when they've got the opportunity and they're surrounded by like-minded individuals, they'll form a cell. 21/7 was just a group of, you know, these guys on their own probably would have done something. It was situational, it was circumstances that brought them together. So in terms of going forward, what role will the internet play? Any strategy that tries to prevent people from discovering knowledge is flawed. You know, Hitler's been dead 70 years. Karl Marx, over 100. This is an ideology, and ideas will always flow. What needs to be challenged is when somebody feels like they're looking for a solution to the shame that they've accumulated. And if they're not allowed to find that solution in their local community, which is the first place they look for it, if they cannot find a solution in their local community, they will look for it outside that community. They will look at the periphery of that community. They needs to be, you know, and online, we can use the online as a way of allowing people to find solutions to often personal problems. You know, I'm having trouble in personal relationships. I'm having trouble with my emotional nature. You know, I'm having trouble with substance abuse. I'm having trouble with criminality. These are the solutions that need to be there when they're needed. And if those solutions aren't there, if the discussion around those problems remains taboo, these individuals are always going to look for something else. It's easy to run away to Syria. It's a lot harder to stay home, be a stand-up guy and say, you know what? I have terrorized this community. I need to make restitution. I need to make amends, and I need to do it right here. And I need the people in the community to be saying, if you do this, you will be free of the shame. You don't need that catch-all martyrdom operation to get free of shame. You can get free of shame right here. And that's why, for me, mosques, you asked the guest, what should mosques be doing? Mosques should be inviting Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. They should be inviting these organizations. They should be inviting organizations like Kick It in Birmingham. They should be inviting them to come and host in the mosque, so that from day one, people can say, you know what? The solution is here. Because the solution is not religion alone. And it's not, it's about, it's about fellowship. It's about friendship. It's about structured program. Everything you get in ALM, you can get it right there in Narcotics Anonymous, right there in community-based projects. It's the community where you need to stay and not run away from.
There are also mental health issues as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which,
what is the biggest connection between mental health and terrorism? Substance abuse. What is the biggest problem? What is the biggest byproduct of cannabis use? We see it constantly. Anybody who smoked cannabis for a few years, suddenly they develop mental health problems. Didn't have them beforehand. Now they've got them. What's the, you talk about, I talked to some lads in Leicester, and they said the lads had run out after Friday prayers and they go and smoke weed in the car park. You know what? 20 years ago, cool. Now we're dealing with a drug that is 20 times more potent, causes 20 times more trouble. You do not need to smoke skunk cannabis very long before you are absolutely crazy enough to run around Reading Park stabbing people.
Yeah. Also, Abdul Haqq, could you give us a little more insight with your views and opinions of mental health and extremism radicalization, and a case study, if you can?
Well, I'm not sure I could give a specific case study, but there are definitely issues to do with mental health. They crop up, I'd say, generally in the community. They do crop up in many of these. I think some of the names which I saw even on the list of Lewis there, is that some of them had actually quite severe mental health. Some of the individuals on that particular list. I think that needs to be taken into consideration. It's something which isn't. This is important for our discussion. It's something usually which isn't taken in, which hasn't actually been. I'm sure the two of you would concur with me. But over the last 20 years, mental health issue as it relates to AQ inspired terrorism or so forth doesn't really come up, but it comes up for white supremacist fanatical terrorism. It always comes up there, but it doesn't come up when if you notice, it doesn't come up when it's any sort of terrorism which a Muslim has committed. That doesn't really kind of get as much sort of airtime. Whereas in other cases, it does kind of get sort of more airtime. What's happened to this in angelic young boy? This blonde angelic young boy. What on earth could have happened to him? But you don't get that same thing with when you see what I'm saying? No. I mean, there should be some parents. There should be some sort of parents. I think that's to do with the dominant culture and dominant mass media. I think that's probably why. But that doesn't really come up for those things where to be honest it should do. If there's a mass shooter, which in mass shooter also is Islamic speaking, is also a terrorist. You see what I'm saying in terms of what they do. So those also need to be. But it's kind of sometimes like when there's those kind of. I think that there's a little bit in the popular culture and the media of the other. There's like an othering more of that kind of terrorism, whereas sort of white supremacist terrorism doesn't largely have. I think that the security services, obviously they've given it a concern, especially of late. But it's just like something that haven't.
before we go to Q&A, the last question is, do you see any future threats? I.e., do you see a resurgence of what's the call? Boko Haram, sorry, not Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, IS, and the current situation in Libya, and also we have Abu Saif, that's based in the Philippines, where there have been reports that people from the UK are going there to join certain groups. Do you see these present threats or future threats coming back to the UK in the near future? Lewis, first.
So again, I always speak with data. If I look at the data set, what percentage of the men in my study for Europe, so this is men who've carried out martyrdom over the last 20 years, what percentage of these individuals had fought overseas in jihad? 30%. Okay, so it's only 30% that have gone out there. Why? Because for the most part, these guys struggle just to live in their own community, let alone go off and travel. So it's a very small percentage. And again, that's just what the data said. In terms of the wider data set, that's all individuals involved in extremism. The number one goal, if we look at Al Jihad magazine, if we look at the discourse, all of the literature, what is the number one goal for everybody who's involved in the sort of Islamist fellowship? Go fight jihad. Go wherever you can. Gotta go. Go Afghanistan. Go to Syria. Go Iraq. Go somewhere. So it's likely that there will be individuals from the UK, from Europe, who will continue to do this. They've been doing it since Bosnia, since Kashmir. It's my father did it, my uncle did it. So there's always going to be that generational thing. But again, we must not conflate that group of extremists. Being involved in jihad is not a necessary precondition for martyrdom. In fact, 70% of people who carried out martyrdom in Europe never went to Syria. They never went to Iraq. They never went to Afghanistan. So if they do, they do. But we shouldn't put all of our energy into trying to follow these people, follow them when they go there, follow when they come back, because that's not what the data says. And I think it's very important, now that we've got the data, that everything we do is evidence-based. Because instead of speculating, well, if he's been to Syria, well, he must be a terrorist. He's not. Yeah. It doesn't make you a terrorist. Lots of reasons to want to go off and fight jihad. Most have nothing to do with wanting to come back here and do anything that we would define as martyrdom. These groups, I'm sure people will continue. People continue. The same as young British lads will continue to join the British Army. The same as older British men will continue to join the Foreign Legion, right? Yes. Sometimes blokes just like fighting, right? Yeah. And it's got nothing to do with terrorism. Often it's about band of brothers. It's about masculinities. It's about the need to feel some excitement in my life, and often the reasons for going off to Syria had absolutely nothing to do with it. Terrorism.
And before we go to Q&A, Abdul Haqq, I'll give you the last question. Abdul Haqq Ashante, the last question is, what advice would you give to someone who might have a friend?
I don't think he'll hear you.
I know the missus comes first. So don't get in trouble. Right, what advice would you give to someone who has a friend, family member, acquaintance, an ex-school student who's abroad and they want to come back to the UK? What advice would you give to a parent who has a son or daughter who's in the Syrian camps, who's joined Al-Shabaab or who's joined another extremist group abroad, and they want to come back to the UK? What advice would you give, Abdul Haqq?
What, to the family, you're saying? Advice to the family.
Pardon?
Advice to the family.
Yeah, to a family or even a friend. Like recently, there's.
I mean, I can't comment on the specifics on the legalities of that, because I'm not sure what the legalities of that are. Yeah. But in terms of if someone had like an associate who was inclined to that, and definitely to advise them of that with regards to what that narrative is about and how the error of that of those ideas. That's what the first thing. I'd also maybe try and put them in touch with people who have, if have some understanding of the narrative or some of the evidences which are utilized to propagate that. That's what I would say first. But they should. That's what would come to mind firstly. I just wanted to touch up which Dr. Lewis mentioned, which is even though the vast majority of the people who may have gone away overseas to participate may have inclined to the jihadi takfiri narrative. There was a few, even though not many. I sort of, from my understanding, not that many, but there was a few who didn't actually also adhere to that jihadi narrative, and they were inspired more by kind of, you could say, like a humanitarian aspect of sort of helping the sort of weak and oppressed, especially like in the case of Bosnia and so forth. I just want to add a little sort of
Agreed.
note there, yeah, regards to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So even though we've got a few minutes left, we're going to have some Q&As. Are there any Q&As from the admin? I'm going to read some questions. Hello, please feel free to share. Can we have from there? Can we speak? Okay, there's a question. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start up their own counter-extremism project in their community because they don't see anybody doing anything? Question. From Yasmin.
Again, I think this is, ontological question, which is, for me, communism is extreme. If you want to, where do you, without a real definition of extremism, you could argue that capitalism is pretty extreme. It hurts poor people quite a lot, right? I really don't think, and it's necessary for us to separate martyrdom terrorism from being somebody who believes that Western capitalism is not necessarily the right way. People who believe, I think communism is a good thing. I think socialism is a good thing. I think living under Sharia might be a good thing. Trying to shut down these debates is ridiculous because there's the evidence that in being involved in these debates creates martyrdom is nonsense. Maybe 1% of ALM ever carried out terrorism. So I'm always going to suggest, why don't you empower your community to talk about politics? You call it extremism if you want. I call it a debate. Get people in, let them talk about stuff that they want to talk about. When you shut it down, you put it underground, you put it on the periphery, you make it attractive to people who wouldn't necessarily be attracted to it to begin with. So open the floor is what I say. Don't try and shut down extremism.
Yeah, you basically answered the second question, which I'll just read out anyway, because the sister, how do we take practical steps and find real solutions to help empower communities in a practical way? Dr. Lewis Harrington just gave his answer.
I thought that was the question. Sorry.
No. I'm just. This is the second question, but you've answered it. And the first question. So I'll just ask Abdul Haqq Ashante. What's your answer to that one?
Yeah, I think first there should be. I think that those certain. See, first of all, it depends if the community, if there's particular people in a community who's showing an interest in the topic, they should try to find out those people who have been sort of within the community on the grassroots, active in sort of working in that field, and then those people kind of have to work together, maybe to in a sort of co-production ethos, in order to, that could be maybe people with more experience coming in, delivering workshops and so forth. And that's some stuff which we used to do. We used to do a lot of workshops and that kind of thing. So workshops on the issue where, we did a lot of sort of workshops and presentations where we broke down some of the ideas which some of these individuals used to preach, which became popular in the community. So that's what I would say. First of all, to reach out to those people who have sort of some familiarity with it first, and then all the other sort of stuff after that would has to be done locally in terms of linking up with councils, local councils, and that kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? And see what projects the councils are doing, and see how local statutory authorities can help with that as well.
Okay, thank you very much for both of you for your great contribution. I'm very honored. And any leaving words before we depart? Any leaving words, Dr. Lewis Harrington? Tell us, when will your book come up? When will your book be coming up? I need to buy it.
I'm halfway through the fourth and final chapter. I've just dealt with methodologies, you know, and that's been an epistemologies, which has been a tough part. But the book consists of what, who, how, and why. And the title of the book is Understanding Martyrdom in Europe. That's should be hopefully done by end of August, and then published later this year. Understanding Martyrdom in Europe, and it's based upon a study of 20 years, specifically on the men who've done the deal, not on anybody else, on a data set of people who've done the deal, and it's with a control group. So it's not just this matters. Why does this matter? How does it compare with the control group? And that's the offer. So hopefully it will finally bring, it's based on about 10 years study, and God willing, it will be of use to the community. I hope so.
It will be.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very grateful. God bless you, brother.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you,
Blessings, and we speak soon. Stay blessed. Abdul Ashante, before you go, any leaving words? And you remember that thing you sent me, the thing about the far right, extremism, and you were looking for sponsorship for it. Do you remember about Tommy Robinson?
Yeah. There's a project where some people are involved in something with dealing with that narrative.
Please tell us about it before you go, and
can we find out more about you? So a few of us were doing some research with regards to that narrative too, and some of the core aspects of the sort of white supremacist narrative, looking at sort of notion of the great replacement theory, sort of paranoia with regards to this sort of paranoia which there is with regards to sort of and focus on Muslim reproduction, some of which is sort of trumped up in many cases. And then sort of, so we're looking at that phenomenon as well. And then also with regards to some of the key people who have sort of fed in to that, who are actually quite popular, actually, quite deemed as quite mainstream, actually. But over the years, I also fed into that sort of narrative. So, you know, people like Melody Phillips and her book, Untitled, which is a terrible, terrible work, to be honest, in terms of some of the ideas which it propounds. Battior, who came up with the Vimitude conspiracy theory, and many others as well, actually fed into this kind of slowly but surely, they actually fed into the white supremacist narrative. I mean, Anders Behring Breivik, the terrorist from Norway, in his Quasi manifesto, actually quotes Melanie Phillips' London. So that just shows how harmful some of these ideas are coming. So we look and tackle that as well. You see what I'm saying? And also notions with regards to while there's a sort of focus, why everyone had their eye on the ball for the last couple of decades or the last 15 years per se, onto what Muslims were doing, all the while, unbeknown to them, it was also sort of bubbling in communities. In sort of poor white communities in different conurbations in the UK as well. I mean, like there's stories such as like the people sort of having like an arms cache in their garage. These kind of things are what some of these white supremacists were doing in the UK. So, but that wasn't also getting minimal attention in the media. So these kind of things as well does show that there's also a concern on that front as well. People plotting and planning to blow up mosques and these kind of things. So yeah, we have to. There has to be parity. You know, we have to be equal opportunities employers. While we condemn the extremism, and the one thing which can't be said is that we haven't sort of said anything with regards to the Muslim community, because we've been doing that in terms of individuals who have surfaced within the community, the ideologues. We've been at the forefront of that, but we're also going to condemn the white supremacist terrorists and fanatics as well, who have been bubbling underneath the radar with minimal attention.
Okay, thank you very much to Dr. Lewis Herrington and my dear friend Abdul Haqq Ashante, and thank you very much to everyone who came, and we hope you enjoyed it. We hope we all learned, hope we all benefited. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum, peace, blessings, goodbye, love, have a nice day, take care, bye-bye.
Take care, bye-bye.
Take care. Stay blessed. Bye-bye.
Stay blessed, brother.